Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom's conversation today, which will provide an update on Sudan's transitional government's efforts to advance freedom of religion or belief in the country. My name is Dwight Bashir, and I'm Director of Outreach and Policy at USCIRF. For those of you not familiar, USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan federal advisory body created by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, or IRFA, to monitor religious freedom abroad and to make policy recommendations to the President, Secretary of State, and Congress. Our work is led by 9 commissioners appointed by the President and the leadership of both political parties in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and is supported by a professional staff of about 20. I'm joined today by 2 of our commissioners who led a USCIRF delegation to Sudan last year, Chair Honorima Bargava and Vice Chair Tony Perkins. We are also joined today by 2 representatives of Sudan's transitional government, Minister of Religious Affairs Nasr al-Din Mufre and Sudan's ambassador to the United States, Nur al-Din Sati. Since its formation in 2019, Sudan's transitional government has taken concrete steps to repeal laws and regulations that severely restricted religious freedom, including the historic repeal of the apostasy law last year. USCIRF hosted an event with Minister Mufre in November of 2020, and we're happy to have him back today to discuss developments in Sudan since then. Today's event will begin with opening remarks from Chair Bargava, followed by Vice Chair Perkins. We will then hear from Ambassador Sati about his government's efforts to engage international human rights organizations to advance religious freedom in Sudan. And finally, Minister Mufre will discuss in more detail the steps his government has taken since we last spoke. Afterward, I'll moderate a brief conversation among the speakers with some opening questions. Then there will be time for some questions from the audience. Now, to ask a question, please use the Zoom webinar's Q&A function at the bottom center of your screen to submit your question in writing, which you can do at any time during the event starting now. It's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Chair Bargava.
Thank you, Dwight, and thanks to all those who have joined us here today. I wish we could be in person and be with the Minister of Religious Affairs. It's wonderful to see you again, and we're grateful to have everyone here for this important discussion. As you may know, for 20 years, USCIRF had recommended Sudan be designated by the State Department as a country of particular concern, or CPC, for systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom. During that period, President Omar al-Bashir ruthlessly applied his own interpretation of Sunni Islam on Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Since assuming power in August of 2019, Sudan's joint civilian military transitional government has taken concrete positive steps, which Vice Chair Perkins will outline shortly. These changes are part of a significant shift in governance and human rights in Sudan, which we will hear more about from the ambassador and from our minister. Over the past year, we have had direct and active engagement with the transitional government on issues related to freedom of religion or belief. In February of last year, as Dwight mentioned, I was part of the USCIRF delegation with Vice Chair Perkins that traveled to Khartoum to assess conditions on the ground. Our delegation met with members of the transitional government, including Prime Minister Hamdok and members of his cabinet, religious and community leaders, academics, political party leaders, and women's rights advocates to gain a firsthand perspective on how the country's sweeping and historic changes have impacted religious freedom conditions. We were very moved by the warm welcome that we received and the ways in which this transition has played out on the ground. Our partners freely discussed with us the opportunities presented by the changes, as well as the challenges that continue of a 30-year legacy of systemic religious oppression. I, like many of you, am deeply inspired by how the Sudanese, and in particular Sudanese women, from tea sellers to teachers to community leaders, played a transformational and catalyzing role during the revolution. We met with many women leaders during our time in Sudan. Their collective action and continued organizing efforts after the revolution have resulted in tangible changes including the repeal of the notorious public order law, and, as Vice Chair Perkins will outline, a number of the reforms in the Freedom and Rights of Religion Act. So, building from their foundational role during the revolution, Sudanese women are demanding representation and voice in all government branches. There's been some progress, and women are represented in the Council of Ministers and the executive branch, and have secured 40% participation in the parliament, which is still yet to be formed. There is much more work to be done. Our visit represented USCIRF's first opportunity to travel to Sudan after the toppling of President al-Bashir. Since then, we found Prime Minister Hamdok's government continues to deliver with grace and with humility and with a lot of courage on his commitment to improve religious freedom for all. We look forward to an update on these efforts from Minister Mufre shortly. Now, let me turn it over to my colleague, Vice Chair Perkins, to provide more detail about some of the progress in Sudan and our decision not to recommend Sudan for the State Department's special watch list in USCIRF's 2021 annual report.
Thank you, Chair Bargava. And I want to join you in thanking the minister as well as our audience for engaging in what I believe is not only a timely discussion, but I think this is actually an encouraging discussion because of what we've seen happen in Sudan. It's good to see you again, Minister, this time while you're here in Washington, D.C. Now, since assuming office in August of 2019, Sudan's transitional government has taken concrete steps, as has been alluded to. These steps have led to ending egregious religious freedom violations. And let me highlight just a few of those. In July of 2020, the transitional government adopted the Fundamental Rights and Freedoms Act. Now, this repealed the apostasy law, ending flogging for blasphemy. It banned female genital mutilation, permitted non-Muslims to drink alcohol, and abolished the guardianship law that required women to get a permit from a male guardian when traveling abroad with their children. The repeal of the apostasy law was an extraordinary step forward, given how entrenched such laws have been in this region and beyond. So we certainly hope the repeal of this law by Sudan, of the apostasy law, will serve as an example of a way forward for other countries, and we hope they certainly will follow it. We're also encouraged by the efforts of Sudan's Department of Education to engage in a wide-scale review of curricular materials to identify and address the religious dictates that have been included in the curriculum under the al-Bashir regime, and to build a curriculum that supports a sense of dignity and belonging for students of all faiths. And we had those conversations back a little over a year ago when we were in Sudan with those in the Department of Education, the Ministry of Education. As the transitional government continued to make progress in advancing religious freedom throughout 2020, we determined, as Chair Bargava said in our 2021 annual report released just about a month ago, that Sudan no longer warrants placement on the State Department's special watch list for severe religious freedom violations. While we no longer recommend Sudan for the special watch list, we will continue to work with and support the transitional government to continue to improve religious freedom conditions in that country. This is a big step forward. We're excited about it, but we want to encourage the Sudanese government, the transitional government, to continue, because there is indeed more work to be done in the months ahead, such as repealing the country's blasphemy law, which still remains in force. Now, we were pleased to see that the U.S. government pledged a total of $356.2 million at the Berlin Donor Conference in 2019 to help stabilize Sudan's economy and support transition to democracy. Now, we continue to urge our government, the U.S. government, to continue support for the transitional government to further implement genuine reforms that enhance human rights, of course, chief among them religious freedom. Now, for a more detailed understanding of the ongoing reforms to advance religious freedom efforts in Sudan, I want to turn to one of our guest speakers, Ambassador Sateh Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jenkins. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. I am honored to be by the side of my minister at this important meeting, and I would like to thank USCIRF for this invitation and for having been on the side of Sudan since particularly, well, for a long time, but I can see that our cooperation, our joint cooperation is bearing fruit at the end, and that we are getting closer to the goal that we have assigned to ourselves, jointly assigned to ourselves, is that to make religious freedom prevail in Sudan and in similar situations as Sudan. Let me just begin by saying that the revolution that took place in Sudan is about human rights. The main, I think, trigger of that, of course, there are the instant triggers, but there are the more profound and deeper triggers of the revolution is an issue of human rights. And Mr. Jenkins mentioned the issue of dignity. Mr. Perkins mentioned the issue of dignity. And actually, dignity is at the center, at the core of the movement has taken place by the youth, the young women and men in Sudan, because they wanted to restore the dignity that has been stolen from them. And the fundamental human rights that they are entitled to, political rights, social rights, economic rights, rights of expression, and of course, religious rights, are among the most fundamental rights that are now issued by our government. Religious freedoms in Sudan, in the context of Sudan, is important because religion has been at the core of the struggle for freedom and justice in Sudan. And because the religious question has always been with us, whether at the political realm, whether in the social realm, whether in the economic realm, and whether in the interactions and the issue of dealing with the diversity of Sudan. Because recognizing religious freedom in Sudan is also a recognition that Sudan is diverse, that the Sudanese citizens have the right to exercise their creed, their religion as they wish, and that nobody has the right to impose any religion or creed on a member of the Sudanese society. Actually, Islam itself it does not prohibit us from coercing people into Islam. One of the main tenets of Islam is La ikraha fi din, no coercion in religion. Nobody is allowed actually to coerce anybody into being a Muslim, because it's a matter of freedom, absolute freedom of choice. The second thing that I would like to mention is that we are grateful for USCIRF for their cooperation, their support to the change that has taken place in Sudan, particularly in the area of religious freedom. And as Mr. Perkins mentioned, and the chairwoman before him, we are thankful for the fact that you, in your 2021 report, you have reported to the State Department that Sudan recommended to the State Department that Sudan should no longer be on the special worst list. And this is extremely important for Sudan, because it allows Sudan to just like the fact that Sudan has been removed from the list of states sponsoring or harboring terrorism. This recommendation is so important to us because it allows Sudan also to be considered and treated as a trustful and trustworthy and trusted and respectable nation. And that's why we think that is an important decision. But of course, we continue to build on that. We are on our path in order to enact all the reforms that have been mentioned by Mr. Perkins. The issue of apostasy has been there, the guardianship law, review of religious curriculum, and I'm sure the minister, when he arrives in a few minutes, will further elaborate on all these issues, because his ministry has been working on issues of reform, whether it's religious reform, which is curriculum reform, which is the review of the status of non-Muslim in the Sudanese society, and the issue, of course, of the blasphemy law is also being considered. I'm sure we will give you more information on that. Having said this, I am, as ambassador to the United States, I would like to express my complete satisfaction for the cooperation that our embassy here and the government of Sudan is getting from the Commission, and we recognize the importance of the role that the Commission has been playing and will continue to play in Sudan. And we appreciate the visit that you have undertaken to Sudan the last year. It was very useful for us because Sudan needs to be reminded of the international standards of religious freedom and issues of compliance and how reforms can be led and can be enacted. And I think your mission was extremely important in that sense. We look forward also to your next mission, I hope, your next visit, as Sudan is preparing now, as the minister just mentioned. We'll also tell you later, preparing its the second conference on religious freedom. It will be hosted by His Excellency, and I am sure he'll be very happy to host you when you get there. Without further ado, I just want to end there, and now the minister, and I back to you in order to lead us through the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those comments. I guess the minister is now next to you, so if we can get him into the screen there, we can certainly turn it over to him for his remarks, and we will have translation for his remarks by USCIRF policy analyst Mohi Omer, who has stepped in. Thank you very much. And I turn the floor over to Minister Mufreh.
السيد الوزير مرحب بك واتفضل.
بسم الله الحمد لله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
In the name of God and hello.
وسعيدين بأنه نحن نتلاقى معكم في هذا الاجتماع المهم.
I am very happy to be meeting with you to discuss some important issues today.
وهو إن دل على شيء إنما يدل على حرص الجميع على إرساء مبدأ الحريات الدينية في العالم.
This is a great indication that people do care about important values of religious freedom around the world,
لا سيما السودان.
including Sudan.
السودان بتاريخه العظيم أنه هو مكان للتنوع.
Sudan, with its deep history, is a place of diversity and inclusion.
نحن نفتخر بسوداننا لأنه قبل 7,000 سنة قبل الميلاد كان هنالك نمط تدين.
We are, as Sudanese, were extremely proud as we had diversity even 7,000 years ago.
ثم جاءت الحقبة المسيحية.
Around the time Christianity arrived,
ودخلت إلى السودان عن طريق السلم.
Christianity entered Sudan peacefully.
ثم جاءت فترة الإسلام.
And then Islam, the period of Islam came.
وأيضا دخل عن طريق السلم عبر اتفاقية.
Also entered Sudan peacefully.
عرفت في التاريخ باتفاقية البغض.
It was an agreement between the Sudanese people and those who spread religion, and it was known as the Bagh Agreement.
وهي تؤسس وتعزز من مبدأ الحريات الدينية.
And it laid the foundation for religious freedom.
الكل يدعو إلى دينه فكانت الكنيسة وكان المسجد.
There was the mosque and there was the church, and they both advocated for freedom religion. freedom of
الناس على
religion.
ذلك، على هذا التسامح وهذه المحبة وهذا التعايش.
This is part of the history, the inclusion and living together in peace and harmony.
لم يحصل هنالك تعنت أو تضييق إلا في فترات الحكم الدكتاتوري.
There was always peaceful coexistence between different religions until dictatorial regimes came to power.
لأن كل العهود الديمقراطية كانت هنالك يعني سماحة في التعايش بين الأديان.
Even the short democratic period we lived in Sudan, there was freedom of religion.
لأنها بترتكز بصورة أساسية على القوانين واللوائح.
Because it was protected by law and regulations in the country.
وتعطي مبدأ الحقوق الإنسانية.
Also protecting human rights. It was based on human rights conditions in Sudan.
إلى أن كانت الحقبة التي حكم فيها النظام البائد 30 سنة.
That's not the case under the previous regime, which governed the country for 30 years.
اللي فرض الأحادية الثقافية.
And they imposed one interpretation of ideology that was well known to the world.
وفرض الأحادية الدينية.
And they imposed one Islamic version on the people.
وحاول أن يجعل الناس على ديانة واحدة.
And they tried to convert the whole country into one religion.
وهذا كلام ضد الفطرة الإنسانية.
And this is against what we stand for.
لأن الله خلق الناس مختلفين ومتنوعين.
We believe God created people in diversity.
لذلك عندما جاءت هذه الثورة وهذه الحكومة.
Therefore, when the revolution came and this new government was formed,
كانت أمام تحديين.
we were facing two challenges.
التحدي الأول كيف أننا نستطيع أن نخرج من قائمة الدول الراعية للإرهاب والمغلقة في الحريات.
One challenge was how to remove Sudan from the list of state sponsors of terrorism.
والأمر الثاني كيف نستطيع أن نعمل قوانين تدير هذا التنوع الموجود في السودان.
And two, how we can practically move to protect religious freedom in the country.
ففي الأولى بحثنا عن القوانين واللوائح التي كانت في السابق وهي مقيدة للحريات.
In terms of religious freedom, we looked into the laws and regulations that restricted religious freedom in the country.
واستطعنا أن نلغيها جميعا.
And we can say to the world today that we were able to abolish all of the laws and regulations that restricted religious freedom in Sudan.
أسسنا لقوانين جديدة تسمح بالحريات الدينية وحقوق الإنسان.
And we passed laws that not only protect but advance religious freedom and human rights in Sudan.
فتحنا على العالم في أنه يرى كيف أننا أنزلنا هذه القوانين في أرض الواقع.
And it was not only done behind closed doors, but it was in the open and the world was watching us.
لا سيما أصدقاؤنا وشركاؤنا في مفوضية الحريات الدينية ولجنة الحريات الدينية في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية.
Especially USCIRF, as this is a primary concern for you.
ودي فرصة نحن نشكرهم على مساعدتهم لنا في أننا نخرج من هذه القوائم.
And we thank USCIRF for putting together a strategy on how to promote religious freedom in Sudan and around the world.
نشكرهم على دعمنا في ذلك.
We thank USCIRF for supporting our efforts to improve religious freedom in Sudan.
لأن المفوضية واللجنة زارونا في السودان ورأوا ذلك في أرض الواقع.
Because the Commission has made a trip to Sudan and they have seen the progress that has been made in Sudan on the ground.
لأنه مبدأنا في هذه الحكومة.
Because our principle in this transitional government depends on.
أننا نقول ونبدأ القول بالعمل.
We don't just say, but also we do.
والأمر الآخر أننا شرعنا قوانين ولوائح.
Also, we have passed laws and regulations
تسمح بممارسة الشعائر التعبدية لكل ديانة.
that allows all Sudanese people without any discrimination to practice their religions freely.
لذلك كان قانون الشؤون الدينية.
For that reason, the law for religious freedom in Sudan
سنة 1980
for 1980
وعدلناه لقانون 2020.
the law that was passed by the previous regime, we changed it into passing a new law in 2020.
حيث أنه يواكب متطلبات العصر والمرحلة.
The new law reflects the true nature of the country.
وكذلك هنالك لأول مرة في تاريخ السودان.
For that reason, for the first time, there is this in Sudan.
عملنا في وزارة الشؤون الدينية والأوقاف على إصدار لائحة وقانون.
For the first time, we passed a law in my ministry too.
ينظم العلاقة ما بين الوزارة والكنيسة.
To protect the relationship between religion institutions and the country and the government.
بحيث أنه يمكن الكنيسة من إدارة شؤونها الداخلية بمفردها.
To enable, the law also enables the church as well as other religious institutions to control their administration, to basically administrate their internal affairs.
دون تدخل من أحد.
Without government intervention.
كما قال الكتاب المقدس.
As the Bible said.
ولوائح الكنيسة الداخلية.
The church should be run by the believers.
سمينا هذه اللائحة بلائحة تنظيم الأعمال الكنائس.
So the new law will allow each religious organization to administrate themselves.
ثم بعد ذلك عملنا مع وزارة التربية والتعليم.
And also we're working closely with the Ministry of Education.
يعني يكون هنالك يعني تعديل في المناهج.
To reform Sudanese curriculum.
لأنها تستوعب الواقع الجديد.
To reflect the Sudanese new reality.
وتخرج أجيال متعايشة.
And to produce generation that is capable and willing to live together in peace and harmony.
ومتسامحة ومحبة للآخر.
Loving and caring of each other.
ولا زالت وزارة التربية تعكف على إخراج مادة جديدة.
As we speak, the Ministry of Education is working to make that reality.
تتعلق بالتربية الوطنية.
We're replacing the religious education with Tarbiyah al-Wataniya. We're replacing it with the Sudanese nationality.
وكذلك سعينا مع وزارة التربية والتعليم.
Also, we're working with the Ministry of Education too.
إنها توظف معلمين للتربية المسيحية.
To hire teachers of other religions, including Christianity.
وعقدنا في نهاية العام الماضي في أكتوبر.
Last year, we convened conference in Sudan.
مؤتمر الحريات الدينية والتعايش السلمي.
The conference was to promote religious freedom in Sudan.
حضرته 250 شخصية.
250 participants were in attendance.
من رجالات الدين المسيحي والإسلامي.
From different religion background or religious background, including Islam and Christianity.
والمثقفين والأدباء.
Also independent people, as well as those who are concerned with religious freedom issues.
والمرأة وشباب المقاومة.
Also women, as well as the young people who brought about the revolution in Sudan.
كان المؤتمر برعاية رئيس الوزراء عبد الله حمدوك.
And the conference was led by the minister, the Prime Minister of Sudan, Abdullah Hamdok.
وخاطب الجلسة الافتتاحية.
And he was the guest speaker at that event.
لأن هذا الأمر محل اهتمام من الدولة الجديدة.
Because the new Sudan is making religious freedom as a priority, as part of the new country.
وأخيرا نستطيع أن نقول.
And finally, we can say.
مثلما قدمنا في الثورة يعني نموذج في الانتصار للحرية والعدالة والمساواة.
As our revolution has shown to the world that if you are fighting for peace, justice, and equality,
قدمنا وسنقدم النموذج في الحريات الدينية والتعايش.
You will win, and we will continue to be an example of not just a successful revolution, but a revolution that projects its value and shows the world that we are going to do what we said we're going to do.
وسنعمل على ذلك بدعمكم.
And we greatly appreciate your support because it reminds us and it helps us to continue to do what we ought to do.
من أجل تأسيس لمركز يختص بالحريات الدينية والتعايش السلمي.
To build the institutions that are necessary to continue to promote, protect, and promote religious freedom in Sudan.
يكون هو مصدر إلهام.
My ministry is also working to build a center for religious coexistence to be an inspirational place for Sudanese people.
ويخرج القيادات التي تمارس العمل من أجل إبداء وتعزيز مبدأ الحريات الدينية والتعايش السلمي في المجتمع السوداني.
To continue to train the Sudanese people and activists who are involved in human rights issues to continue to promote religious freedom and human rights issues in the country.
نستطيع أن نقول هذا يعني الأمر سيكون محل احترام وتقدير عند العالم أجمع.
And again, this center, we wanted to reflect our values and the values of the revolution to project to the world that we're not only talking about this, but we're doing it.
لأن السودان يمثل عمق الأفريقيا.
We recognize our position as Sudan geographically, and we are part of this region that is very diverse and very inclusive.
وكذلك الشرق الأوسط.
Not only we're part of Africa, but also we're part of the Middle East.
الثورة السودانية ألهمت العالم أجمع.
Again, our revolution has inspired the world.
أصبحنا مضرب مثل في العالم في السلمية.
We have become an example of peaceful revolution in the world.
والانتصار للحريات.
And the victory for freedoms.
نتطلع أن نكون النموذج الملهم للشعوب في الحريات الدينية والتعايش السلمي.
We will continue to do our best and continue to make sure that we are the shining example of freedom.
نشكركم على إتاحة الفرصة.
I thank all of you for the opportunity and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Minister, for reviewing a number of the efforts that the transitional government has taken, and particularly your ministry, and some of these new entities you're talking about in moving forward with this Center for Religious Coexistence. Thank you for reviewing. But let me remind the audience, please, to ask a question. Use that Q&A function. We've gotten a few, but please go ahead. Now's the time to ask your questions. You've had a chance to hear from the ambassador and the minister. What I'd like to do is go ahead and just simply start with a question, throw it out to the minister and the ambassador. You both mentioned in great detail about the vibrancy and diversity within Sudan. And we saw that during our visit last year, certainly up front and center. But obviously there are diverse groups and some elements of society that wouldn't like to see you all succeed. So the first question is really, how is the general public receiving your reform efforts so far? And have you seen some obstacles from other elements of society who maybe remnants of the previous regime or others who would not like to see you all succeed in moving this ambitious human rights and religious freedom agenda? Perhaps. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. السيد السفير، السؤال هو نعم أن السودان كدولة هي تتمتع بنوع من التنوع الديني والتنوع الثقافي، وأيضا الحكومة السودانية هي ساعية لترسيخ مفاهيم ومبادئ التنوع والتعايش، وأيضا أنتم قمتم بدور معين لتعزيز الحريات الدينية في السودان. السؤال هو هل هنالك بعض العوامل التي تعرقل هذه الخطوات التي تقوم بها الحكومة لتعزيز الحريات الدينية؟
سؤال للسفير ولا الوزير يا محي الدين؟
أي واحد فيكم.
طيب هو السؤال أشبه بالتخصص، أفضل أجاوب أنا.
The question seems to be very pointed, so I would like to take it.
Yes. يعني التحدي الموجود أمامنا هو أننا نريد أن نزيل الشوائب والمفهوم الذي رسخه النظام البائد.
One of the biggest challenges we face today is removing the obstacles that have been put by the previous regime when it comes to human rights issues.
لأن الإسلام هو الدين الذي يعلو ولا يعلى عليه.
Because the previous regime has cemented this notion that Islam is better religion than any other religion.
وأنه بعد انفصال جنوب السودان ليس هنالك يعني عنوان للمسيحية أو ديانة أخرى.
And the previous regime has made it clear that non-Muslims are only in South Sudan. And after the country was separated, everyone living in Sudan should be a Muslim.
وأن السودان أصبح دولة إسلامية.
And Sudan has become an Islamic state since the South seceded.
ويجب أن يحكم بالشريعة الإسلامية.
And therefore should be governed by Sharia law.
هذه الافتراضية عملوا على من أجلها يعني سنين طويلة.
And the previous government worked for 30 years to impose this notion.
بعد العام 2011.
And especially after 2011, after the country was divided.
الآن يعني نعمل على إزالة هذا المفهوم.
And now we're working diligently to remove that notion.
وساعدنا في ذلك كثيرا يعني قدرة الشباب على إدارة التنوع.
And one element that is promising, playing a huge role in spreading this value of living together, is the youth in Sudan. They are completely pushing against that old narrative.
كيف أنهم استطاعوا أن يتقبلوا الآخر في الثورة السودانية.
Because during the revolution, people came together regardless of their backgrounds and worked together to make sure that the revolution succeeds.
لأن أغلب هؤلاء الشباب هم خريجو الجامعات.
Because one of the reasons why they came together is most of them are college graduates.
حيث درسوا في المدارس والجامعات بالتنوع الديني والثقافي والإثني والجغرافي.
They worked together, went to the same schools, so this notion of religious differences is not part of this new generation's thinking, even though they were forced to think it that way.
لذلك استطاعوا أنهم هم يطوعوا الواقع لصالحهم.
That's why the current Sudan is pushed on the direction that is completely an opposite direction to the previous regimes.
الآن نريد أن نرسخ هذا المفهوم عند المجتمع السوداني.
And that's why we're working together to make sure that that becomes a norm in Sudan.
عبر المساجد والكنائس.
And also we're bringing religious leaders into the discussion to take a part in it.
وكذلك في الورش والمنتديات.
And not only in religious settings, but also in other settings, trying to spread those values of coexistence.
كذلك في المدارس والأنشطة.
Also in schools and other activities.
هذا ما نريد أن يعني أن نعززه في المجتمع.
That's what we wanted to replace that old ideology with.
هذا تحدي نعم لكن الفرص مواتية.
This is a huge challenge, but we believe the opportunity is there to continue to do this.
Thank you very much for that answer. Why don't I turn it over to our chair and vice chair, first chair Bargava, if you have a question you'd like to ask the minister ambassador.
Sure. Thank you so much again to both of you for being here. I know that there's a constitutional process, a process of drafting a constitution that is expected within the next year. And one of the concerns that is often raised is that the changes in the laws that have taken place over the last year, how can they be sustained and made sure that they are something that lasts for some time. And so I wanted to ask if you expect that those reforms will be part of the constitutional process. In particular, there are questions about the apostasy law, and then about the blasphemy law that is still in process, that has yet to be passed, and how that might be part of this longer constitutional process.
السؤال هو يرتبط المسألة الدستورية، كل التغييرات التي تمت الآن هي تمت بطريقة من قبل مجلس الوزراء، أيضا السوفرين كونسل، المؤسسة الانتقالية تحديدا. فالسؤال هو مرتبط عن كيفية معرفة أن هذه التغييرات هي جزء من العملية التي تقوم بها الحكومة السودانية والشعب السوداني في عملية وضع دستور جديد. كيف يمكن ضمان أن هذه التغييرات هي تغييرات حقيقية ولم يتم تغييرها بشخص أو آخر؟
الوثيقة الدستورية هي التي تحكم السودان الآن.
The transitional constitution is the one that is governing Sudan now.
وهي التي قالت بصريح العبارة.
And in the constitution, it's clearly put there.
وهي التي قالت.
And in it, it said.
أن السودان بلد متنوع في أديانه وثقافاته ومجتمعه.
It said Sudan is a diverse country. There is a religious diversity as well as ethnic diversity in Sudan.
وأن الحكومة تقف على مسافة واحدة من كل الأديان.
And the constitution requires the government to stand on an equal distance when it comes to religion.
عضد هذا المفهوم.
And this notion was cemented by
وثيقة السلام.
And this notion was cemented by the peace agreement.
التي قالت أن السودان.
And in the peace agreement, it said Sudan is
دولة ديمقراطية فيدرالية متعددة.
Says Sudan is democratic and federalist and it with diversity.
وأن الدولة تقف على مسافة واحدة من كل الأديان.
It reiterated this notion that the government will stand on an equal distance when it comes to religion.
وكل التشريعات نابعة من الوثيقة الدستورية.
And all of the laws and regulations that have been passed recently are mainly depending on this notion.
ومرتكزة ارتكاز أساسي على الوثيقة الدستورية.
And they are all supported by the transitional constitution.
وهذه الوثيقة الدستورية جاءت بإمضاء من كل الحركات حركات التحرر اللي هي نقدر نقول عليها الأحزاب السياسية.
And the transitional constitution was put forward by all of Sudanese parties,
ومنظمات المجتمع المدني.
Including political parties, civil society organizations, as well as the art movements.
وجاءت عليها حركات الكفاح المسلح.
And the art movements.
سيجي المجلس التشريعي.
And we are going to form the transitional council.
وهو يعني سيكون مفصل على الحرية والتغيير والأحزاب السياسية.
We're going to form the the transitional legislative body, and that would be formed by the same parties that have come together to put forward the transitional constitution.
وقوى الكفاح المسلح ومنظمات المجتمع المدني.
Same as I mentioned, all of those who played part in putting together the transitional constitution would be part of the legislative body.
وهي ذات التنظيمات التي جاءت بهذه الحكومة التي أصلت لهذه القوانين.
And they are the same political parties that form the current government as well as pass these laws.
فالمجلس التشريعي سيبصم على هذه القوانين.
And we are confident that the legislative body would make sure that they would pass those laws.
لأنها متماشية مع الواقع السوداني.
They would ratify those laws because they reflect our diversity.
وتواكب القوانين الدولية.
And it's part of this, they rely on international standard as well.
وأن المؤتمر الدستوري الجامع.
And the constitutional conference.
الذي سيكون في آخر الفترة الانتقالية.
That would be held close to the end of the transitional period.
والذي يؤسس للدستور الدائم للبلاد
to build a permanent constitution or to draft a permanent constitution.
سيكون من هؤلاء في المجلس التشريعي من لجنة القوانين.
And those who are going to do this would be from the legislative body.
وهي التي تصيغه.
They are the ones that are going to lead the process.
وسيطرح على الشعب السوداني.
And then it would be put for the Sudanese people.
الذي ينضوي تحت منظمات المجتمع المدني وتحت الأحزاب السياسية.
Through political parties as well as the civil society community in Sudan.
فهذه القوانين لا رجعة فيها.
So all of this is to say that we're not going back, we are going forward.
نؤكد على ذلك.
And I would like to assure you that this is going to be the case.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to check if Vice Chair Perkins, if you have any questions at this time before we turn to audience questions.
No, Dwight, I think I would go ahead and move to the audience and allow them to ask their questions. Thank you. If I get one, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let me turn to the audience questions. Thank you again for your questions. There's been several. I'm going to characterize some. There's been several that have come in about the apostasy, a little confusion on the apostasy and blasphemy laws. As Vice Chair Perkins mentioned, and many of us over time, apostasy law has been repealed. The question, I think, for the minister and the ambassador, what's the next step for the blasphemy law that people are interested in? How is the transitional government? When are we getting to either legislation, or what can we expect in terms of repeal of the existing blasphemy law?
ماذا نتوقع عن قوانين الردة التي لم يتم إزالتها حتى الآن؟
بالنسبة لقانون الردة تمت إجازته في المجلسين. ألو؟
نعم واصل.
تمت إجازته من قبل المجلسين وتم التوقيع عليه من رئيس مجلس السيادة.
السيد السفير، هل البلاسفيمي هي الردة صح؟
نعم.
الردة، قوانين الردة.
ايوه سؤال عن قوانين الردة. ايوه الوزير بيرد على الموضوع.
سامعنا يا محي الدين؟
سامعك تماما. So the Sudanese government has actually drafted a law to repeal this, and the law has passed the apostasy law. Yeah, has passed both of the legislative bodies, or the bodies that are acting as the legislative body, and the president has signed into that. لكن السؤال هو عن قوانين الردة.
أيوة، أنا بتحدث عن قانون الردة الذي ألغي.
نعم.
استبدل بالمادة 126.
نعم. واصل.
أنا أقول إنه قانون الردة تم إلغاؤه في اجتماع المجلسين اللي هي بتمثل المجلس التشريعي في البلاد، وتم استبداله بالمادة 126.
نعم، يبدو لي السؤال هو عن التجديد أو التكفير، قوانين التكفير.
أيوة، أنا أقصد كده، أنا ما ماشي معك فيها، إنه بعد إلغاء قانون الردة تم استبدال المادة بالمادة 126 التي تقول
When we repealed the apostasy law, we also changed part of the blasphemy law too. واصل.
أن أي شخص يكفر شخص أو جماعة أو طائفة.
We clearly outlined that if anyone makes accusation of any person who is as an infidel,
يحكم عليه ب10 سنوات سجن.
would be punished by 10 years in prison.
أو الغرامة أو العقوبتين معا.
Or would be fined, or would be held accountable of both accounts.
هذه المادة تمت إجازتها في اجتماع المجلسين.
And this is now a law in our books.
واعتمدت من رئيس مجلس السيادة.
As I mentioned, the president of the Transitional Council has also signed into that.
وتم نشرها في جريدة وزارة العدل.
And it has been part of the books now in the country.
وهي سارية المفعول في القضاء.
And again, this is part of the law as of today.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. There's questions about the return of properties. There was a mention, I think, Minister, of the importance of addressing that, particularly of Christian-owned properties and churches who had been confiscated. What role might your ministry play in this, and how do you see the law changing here? I believe you alluded to it, but the question is, when will these Christian properties that were taken in years gone by the previous regime be restored and get recognition as places of worship?
ما هو وضع أخذ الأموال أو الأماكن التعبدية للطائفة المسيحية؟ كما تعلم أن الحكومة السابقة هي أخذت بالقوة بعض المناطق التعبدية أو الكنائس من الطائفة المسيحية. ما هو وضع المجموعة دي؟ هل أعيدت الكنائس لهم؟
جاءنا في الوزارة بعد يعني إصدار نشرة لكل الكنائس المسيحية في السودان بأن كل من صودرت ممتلكاته فليأتي إلينا في الوزارة.
My ministry made it clear that if anyone's property has been confiscated by the previous regime, they are asked to come to the ministry.
جاءتنا طائفتان.
And when we announced that, there are two religious sects came to my ministry.
أذكر أن من بينها الكنيسة الإنجيلية.
Evangelical Church.
وجاءت بملفاتها كلها.
And they came and they presented to us what has been confiscated from them.
وذهب المستشار القانوني لأنه عندهم قضية في القضاء.
And we referred the case to the Ministry of Justice.
وذهب المستشار القانوني للوزارة إلى القاضي وأخبره أن الذين فعلوا ذلك وأن الذين كانوا يديرون الكنيسة باسم الوزارة قد ألقي هذا القرار.
And I sent my counselor, my lawyer, the lawyer who was part of the ministry, to go to the Department of Justice with the evangelicals, and the Department of Justice has ensured them that that would be returned to them because it was confiscated illegally.
لأن الذين كانوا يتحكمون في الكنيسة بأمر الوزارة هم من تم التعدي على أو عبرهم تم التعدي على الكنيسة.
Because people, the Ministry of Justice found that people who confiscated the churches were part of the previous regime.
ومن ثم سلمنا هذا الملف إلى لجنة إزالة التمكين.
And we have also taken that file and presented it to the committee that is responsible to returning stolen properties.
التي تختص باسترداد الأموال المنهوبة بسبب النظام البائد.
Yep, not only confiscated churches, but the new committee is responsible for returning confiscated and stolen money by the previous regime.
هذا الملف الآن موجود عند هذه اللجنة وفتحت فيه التحقيق.
And currently they are working on that file as well as others.
ونحن نتابع هذا الملف عبر مستشار الوزير لشؤون المسيحيين.
Through my lawyer, we have been following this file closely.
Thank you very much.
هذه الملفات هي التي جاءتنا.
Yeah, we'll continue to monitor that.
Okay, the final couple of questions, I'll ask them together because there's one follow-up, and just for our benefit, a clarification a little bit deeper. You mentioned about the blasphemy law, that there potentially were other lighter punishments, potentially maybe a 10-year sentence now you said are on the books. Could you clarify what you meant by the blasphemy law, the changes that were made along with the apostasy repeal. And secondly, there's a question about the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, which was held in October with a member of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, Her Excellency Raja Nicola, and over 200 participants. You mentioned another conference coming. What do you expect to come out of these conferences? Is this something that we could see other issues being taken up by the transitional government? And when might that happen?
لدي سؤالين لنختم هذا اللقاء. السؤال الأول هو مرتبط بقوانين التكفير وليست قوانين الردة، قوانين التكفير أو التجديف، وإن كنت تخبرنا ذلك، نمرة واحد. والسؤال الثاني هو مرتبط بالمؤتمرات التي أقمتموها، المؤتمر الذي أقمته لتعزيز الحريات العامة في العام الماضي، وأيضا المؤتمر الآخر الذي تخطط له في أكتوبر في هذا العام. ما هو الهدف من هذه المؤتمرات، وما هي الأشياء التي تريد أن تتحقق من خلال عقد هذه المؤتمرات؟
بالنسبة لي قانون التكفير، صحيح أن هنالك في عهد النظام البائد أن الذين كانوا ضد الإسلام من أصحاب الديانات المسيحية أو الديانات الثقافية الأخرى المستمدة من الواقع السوداني، هنالك كان جزء من المسلمين كانوا يكفرون أتباع الديانات الأخرى.
So to clarify, the previous sentences I mentioned was about it was on apostasy, but in terms of the blasphemy, let me quickly provide a quick background, which is that the members of the previous regime have been used blasphemy to single out members of other religions as infidels.
بل أن جزء من المسلمين كانوا يكفرون المسلمين المخالفين لهم في المذهب.
Not only they were doing this to members of other religious groups, but also members of the Muslim faith who disagree with them.
وعلت هذه المفردات.
They use that.
وأحدثت كثير من الشرخ في المجتمع السوداني.
And it created a lot of problems as groups would just single out other groups that they don't like.
حتى أن عيد الكريسماس كان في الماضي.
Even Christmas in the past was.
لا يستطيع المسيحيون أن يعملوا مظاهر للاحتفال في الطرقات العامة.
They were not allowed to celebrate Christmas because of that law.
وكانت هنالك يعني مناشير كانت تنشر قبل الكريسماس بأيام تكفر الذين يشاركون المسيحيين في أعيادهم.
Because of the blasphemy that was in place right before Christmas, actually, the government and members of the previous government would post this stuff demonizing the Christian faith.
لذلك كان لابد من تأسيس قوانين تردع هؤلاء.
For that reason, to avoid that, we need laws in place to make sure that hate speech is not protected.
وهذا ما جئنا به في المادة 126.
That's what we replaced the blasphemy law with.
التي صاغتها وزارة العدل.
And the Ministry of Justice is the one that led the effort in this.
لذلك بعد هذه أو تعديل هذه المواد التشريعية.
After we repeal this law.
الآن أعياد الكريسماس في السودان لها مظاهر.
And right now, people are freely empowered to practice their faith publicly without being demonized.
وأن على مستوى رئاسة الحكومة والوزارة تشارك المسيحيين في أعيادهم.
And not only that, but also the government is involved in promoting this religious diversity and celebration.
وأصبح المسيحيون الكريسماس يعني إجازة قومية في السودان.
And not only that, as I mentioned, our government is playing a part and in participating to celebrate religious diversity. And today, Christmas is a national holiday in Sudan.
حتى المسلمون يعني ارتدعوا عن تكفير المسلمين.
And as I mentioned, this law allows members of the same faith to accuse each other of infidelity, and that's why it has to be put to an end.
بسبب هذا القانون.
Because of this law.
بالنسبة للسؤال الآخر
As to your second question,
هو يعني الآن نستطيع أن نقول أن التعايش الديني في السودان ومبدأ الحريات الدينية
we can say that now in Sudan, religious diversity and inclusion is.
لا نريد أن يكون بالخطب والكلام على وسائل الإعلام.
We don't want it just to be a speech or talk that people give.
إنما نريد أن نؤصل له ونؤسس له في المجتمع.
We wanted the society also to be brought along with these changes.
وهذا لابد أن يكون بالملتقيات والمنتديات والورش والأوراق.
And for that to happen, we will continue to organize these public events as conference and workshops and the like.
التي تخرج منها التوصيات أو تخرج منها التوصيات.
To draft and arrive into specific conclusions and recommendations.
سنهتدي بها في وزارة التربية والتعليم.
And these recommendations are helpful for us at my ministry specifically.
وفي الخطب في المساجد.
And also help religious leaders in mosques and other settings.
وكذلك في الكنائس.
In mosques and churches.
وفي الأندية الرياضية.
And other public places such as sports arenas.
وفي قطاعات الشباب والمرأة.
And within the youth and women settings.
حتى يكون هذا تربية ومنهج.
So that we can spread this value of inclusivity and coexistence.
وواقع معاش في أرض الواقع.
To spread it across the society, and this is what these conferences can help us do.
لذلك نهتدي بهذه المؤتمرات.
That's why we extremely value this type of conferences.
التي يرعاها أعلى مؤسسة في الحكومة هو رئيس الوزراء.
We're very serious about this because our government is deeply involved in this, from the head of the government to a lower employee or lowest employee.
ويشرف عليها مجلس السيادة.
And the transitional council is the one that is overseeing all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. I know we've gone a few minutes over. You've been so generous of your time. I wanted to squeeze one final question, really, to get to some of the different attendees who were asking, since there are no Christian members of the cabinet, would there be Christian members of the Christian Affairs Department dealing with Christian places of worship? You mentioned Christmas, you mentioned some of the efforts, but the question, why has the ministry not appointed Christians in that department dealing with the places of worship and Christian affairs? Thank you.
السيد السفير تبدو ولا الوزير؟ اوكي افتكرتك انت اللي بترد يا سيد السفير، عشان كده قلت ما تعرف. اوكي. السؤال هو السيد الوزير، السؤال هو لماذا لم نرى أعضاء من الطوائف الأخرى، مثلا الطائفة المسيحية في الحكومة الحالية في أعلى المناصب؟ نمرة واحد. والسؤال اللي بعديه المرتبط به بصورة مباشرة هو لماذا لم نرى الإخوة المسيحيين يقودون الهيئة التي هي مسؤولة عن إدارة أعمالهم داخل وزارة الشؤون الدينية؟
طيب، سؤال مهم وعميق ويجب الإجابة عليه. أول حاجة، على مستوى مجلس السيادة الآن السيدة رجاء نيكولا عضو مجلس السيادة هي مسيحية.
So in terms of the Christian community representation in the current government, we have one member of the transitional sovereign council, and that is Raja Nicole, and she is a Christian.
والآن أمام الحكومة أعظم أولوياتها في هذه الفترة هو السلام.
And one of the most important one of the priorities of the current government is to achieve comprehensive peace.
مستشار رئيس الوزراء لشؤون السلام مسيحي.
And the current advisor, the #1 advisor on peace issues for the Prime Minister is also a Christian.
وبروفيسور
person.
جمعة كندا.
And his name is Professor Juma Kunda.
وأن مستشار الوزير وزير الشؤون الدينية لشؤون المسيحيين لأول مرة هو يعني مسيحي.
And in my ministry, and this is to note for the first time it happened in Sudan, is that one of my advisors, and especially the one that advises me on religious affairs when it comes to the Christian community in Sudan, is Christian.
إدارة شؤون الكنائس قديما كان يديرها المسلمون.
The department that is responsible of dealing with Christian issues within my ministry, historically that has been led by a Muslim, but that's not the case in my ministry.
فبقرار وزاري يعني ألقينا هؤلاء ويعني أفرغنا هذه الإدارة من كل المسلمين.
Not only the top of this department is Christian, but all of them who work in this matter are Christians. There's no Muslim working within that department.
وكتبت خطابا لرئيس الوزراء باستثناء التعيين للمسيحيين في هذه الإدارة.
I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister when I came to power, and it was very clear that I mentioned this department should be led by Christians.
وهو مشكور قال أن الذين يديرون هذه الإدارة شؤون الكنائس يجب أن يكونوا خبراء.
And not only that, we didn't just hire Christians, but we hired those who are qualified.
وصدق ب5 وظائف هي في الدرجة الثالثة والدرجة الرابعة والخامسة.
And when he agreed to this, we created these positions that are laid down within my ministry from level 4, 5.
وهي درجة خبراء وليس مدخل خدمة.
And these levels are very high level within the ministry, and that's how we do things in Sudan.
وتم التصديق على هذه الوظائف من وزير العمل والتنمية، وزير العمل والإصلاح الإداري.
And not only the Prime Minister has agreed to these new roles that we are giving to our brothers and sisters, but also other ministries such as the Ministry of Labor was also part of this process.
وتم تحويل الملف إلى إدارة شؤون الخدمة.
And this file, other parts of the government is also responsible in it.
وهو بدوره جاء لنا بخطاب في الوزارة.
And then after going through the process, we came back to the ministry, my ministry.
أن رشحوا لنا 5 من الخبراء ليتم تعيينهم.
And we did ask our Christian brothers and sisters to nominate 5 people so that we could have them run this department.
قلت أنا لا أختار.
I said I would never pick anyone. I wanted to come from them.
إنما تطرح للمسيحيين ليتنافسوا في هذه الوظائف ال5.
Yep, and I opened it up for different Christian communities to compete and to be part of this administration.
هذا ما
Department.
سأحققه أول ما أعود من هذه الزيارة.
And it hasn't been fully finalized. And when I return to Sudan, this is one of my main priorities.
نحسم هذا الملف تماما.
And then this file would be completely under their control, and we're going to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we've definitely gone beyond our hour, and we'll have to wrap up. Now, I want to thank first our chair and vice chair for leading this important and timely conversation today on Sudan. And of course, Sudan's Minister of Religious Affairs, Nasruddin Mufra. Thank you so much for your detailed insight and giving us update on developments. And of course, Ambassador Sati for sharing his insight and expertise. I also want to thank Mohi Omer, who did a valiant job, not only translating, but of course, facilitating this event, he covers Sudan for the Commission, and our Senior Communications Specialist, Danielle Ashbahian, for her work on the event today. If you'd like to learn more about our work on Sudan, I encourage you to visit our website at www.uscirf.gov. We look forward to hosting similar conversations on other countries and issues in the weeks and months ahead. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on USCIRF Conversations. Have a good day.